All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Stephen Scarrett Davis, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Maryland State Arts Council. A couple quick notes before we get started. To ensure an equitable process, we will be using a script to guide today's panel meeting. So there will be a high level of formality in our presentation. And please also note that the meeting is being recorded. Panelists, thank you again for being here and for your service to the communities of Maryland for the spring grant round. Happy to have you back. Since you've seen a lot of these slides, these opening slides before in the panel meeting and in your various trainings and refresher, we'll move through them very quickly, but if you have any questions, please let us know. To begin, a reference shot of the features for Google Meet. Please note the mute, the microphone icon, and the video camera icon buttons at the bottom of the screen. Panelists, to avoid any background noise, we ask that you remain on mute during the meeting, unless you are speaking, of course. Additionally, we ask that all comments regarding applicants are vocalized during the meeting, and please refrain from using the chat feature for that purpose. Are there any questions about Google Meet? Hearing none, we'll next go to introductions. I'll start by introducing the Maryland State Arts Council team members and our roles during today's meeting. I've already introduced myself, and my role beyond this introduction is monitoring today's meeting. Also monitoring the process is Maryland State Arts Counselor Chris Sloan. Good morning, Chris. Kathy Teixeira, Grants Director, will be serving as panel facilitator and averaging panel final scores. Liesl Fenner, Public Art Program Director, and Ryan Patterson, Public Art Project Manager, are the staff discipline experts today. They have reviewed the applications being reviewed by you all today. Rosa Chang, Special Projects and Grants Management Associate, will be our timekeeper. And now I'm going to ask the panelists to please introduce yourselves by name and organization or art form. Lisa will call out your name for your introduction, so please be sure to unmute yourself before speaking and giving your introduction. Lisa?
Welcome, everybody. Sarah Hall.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Hall, and I'm the Executive Director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts.
Thank you. Sarah Caparaletti.
Hi, I'm Sarah Caparaletti. I'm a mixed media artist, and I work for the Sandy Spring Museum and Prince George's County Arts Division.
Thank you. And Christian Benefiel.
Hi, my name's Christian. I'm the Director of Welding Fabrication for Chesapeake College. I've been a sculptor in the area for 20 years.
Great. Thank you, Christian. Gail?
Yes, good morning. Yes, I'm Gail Mangan Castle, and I'm a visiting artist throughout the Anne Arundel County. I'm a mural artist as well.
Thanks, Gail. And Perrin Collery?
Hi, I'm Perrin Collery. I'm a ceramic artist living in Southern Maryland.
Thanks, Perrin. All right.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, panelists. In accordance with Maryland's Open Meetings Act, applicants may also be attending online. Counselors, applicants, and any other guests may observe but may not otherwise participate in the process. We ask that if you are if you're here as a monitor or to observe, please be sure to remain on mute and off camera throughout the duration of the meeting. We will now review MSAC's guiding documents to ground today's process. The first guiding document is our land acknowledgement statement. This is our statewide land acknowledgement statement developed out of a land acknowledgement project in consultation with tribal elders throughout the state. We acknowledge the land and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nasu Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Youghiogheny River Band of Shawnee, and the tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. More information is on our website in the resources section under Land Acknowledgement Project. Next is our equity and justice statement. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its supporting collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. The vision of the Maryland State Arts Council is that we play an essential role ensuring that every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And our mission is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts is a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. We are operating under a strategic plan adopted in 2019. I'll read the bolded portion of this slide. There's more information about our strategic plan in the About section of msac.org under Strategic Plan. Goal 1, increase participation. Goal 2, provide intentional support. Goal 3, build capacity. Goal 4, leverage connections. And Goal 5, bolster Maryland arts. And in all of our public meetings and all of the meetings that involve the public, and in our internal meetings for that matter, we look to these creative meeting actions as a guide for our discussions. I'm going to ask actually that the panelists come off of mute and read these aloud in turn. There are more creative meeting actions than panelists, so you'll have to read more than one. But please just come off of mute as you're moved to do so. I'll start with the first one, and then another panelist can jump in with the second and on and through the list. So the first is celebrate being in the space with other creative people.
Engage with everyone's presence as a gift.
Acknowledge that together we know a lot.
Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry.
Share your idea and trust that it will be heard.
Use I statements.
Focus
Go ahead.
focus your language on the task at hand.
Hold one another accountable with care.
Apply yes and. I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it.
Balance speaking and listening.
Thank you so much, panelists. Next, we'll review impact versus grant writing and how it relates to equity in this process. The application for the Public Art Across Maryland program is meant to inspire authentic reflection and internal analysis for each applicant, with the knowledge that the Maryland State Arts Council is to be seen and utilized as a collaborative partner in the process. One aspect of this partnership is to guide panelists to see beyond the polish of grant writing that may be inequitably influenced by the privilege of resources, whether they're financial, educational, or otherwise, and instead for panelists to focus on the impact of the applicant. We also ask in today's process that panelists frame their responses as recommendations. So for example, I think this is an old slide, if we could advance to the next slide. So for example, minimal information is provided about the applicant's plan for community engagement. That comment as a recommendation would be, I would recommend that the applicant include a detailed plan for community engagement in the planning process. Your recommendations that you provide here and in Smart Simple provide valuable feedback for applicants, and that is shared with applicants if they request feedback. Are there any questions about any of the expectations or guiding documents that we've gone through so far? All right, I'm going to end my portion and hand it over to Kathy Teixeira to lead us through the next part of the introduction. Take it away, Kathy.
Thanks, Stephen. The goal of today is to arrive at an average panel score for 26 applications submitted from across the state. We will review all applications that received an initial score of 90% or higher. Please note this panel meeting is not the full panel review process. Comprehensive application reviews and initial scores have been submitted by the panelists prior to today's meeting. Today is an opportunity to add to or edit those reviews and submit final scores based on discussions held by the panelists. Based on your discussion and final scoring, MSAC will determine the awarding of final grants. Also, a reminder to panelists that this is not a comparative process. Each application is to be evaluated individually based on the rubric provided. Any comparison content between applications should not influence your score. And on the screen, you'll see a breakdown of the time allotted for each application's review. This process mirrors the panel process for the National Endowment for the Arts. And with MSAC's commitment to equity in the panel process, it requires anonymity of specific panelist scores. The initial and final scores shared today are the averages from all panelist scores. So we'll start by sharing a slide of the grant application's initial average score. The lead reader will start off with up to 2 minutes to introduce the grant in connection with the rubric. Please note that panelists, you do not need to fill the full 2 minutes. Our timekeeper, Rosa, will alert us at the 2-minute mark. Then we will open it up for additional discussion with all panelists for 3 minutes. The discussion period is to be used for sharing additional information or recommendations in alignment with the rubric. If the lead reader was cut off in their opening remarks, they would be welcome to complete their thoughts in this discussion period. Rosa will again alert us at the 3-minute mark. Then I will ask staff discipline experts Lisa and Ryan to contribute thoughts based on their analysis of the application. Their contributions are intended to ensure that recommendations are in alignment with the rubric and MSAC's commitment to equity, justice, and procedural transparency. Then panelists will be asked to log their final scores and comments in Smart Simple, and the final average scores will be shared. Please note that any identified conflicts of interest will be announced prior to an application's review. Panelists, if you have a conflict of interest that we do not already recognize, please just announce yourself at the beginning of that application review. Those with conflicts will not participate in the discussion and scoring. Finally, I'd like to mention that we have scheduled breaks at each 90-minute mark, and depending on how we're doing on timing, we may shift some of those break times, but we'll be sure to check in with you all before we do. And a quick reminder again for our counselors and all guests joining us today that you may not participate verbally or in the chat box. Your role today is as an observer only. And also, please be sure to remain on mute and turn your cameras off for the duration of the meeting. Also, a reminder for panelists to also stay on mute unless you're speaking. This will really help eliminate any background noise. Before we move on to begin our reviews today, are there any questions regarding the panel meeting structure? All right, if not, we will get started. We're going to start off with review of the new Artworks project grants. Panelists, you should be logged into your Smart Simple account and in the panelist home screen. Applications for review will be in the pending final review section. If you click on the last modified header, it will sort your list in the order of reviews we'll be running through today. And please make sure you are opening the correct application at each review. I'll be announcing the ID and the applicant name. So I'll give you a moment to get your list sorted right now. And the first application that should appear on your list, if you sorted correctly, is for the Downtown Frederick Partnership. So we will get started with our first application. Please open application ID 2023-19743, submitted by the Downtown Frederick Partnership. The average initial score is 95.83%. Lead reader, Perrin, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Hi. Okay, so this is an application from the Downtown Frederick Partnership, partnering with the African American Resources Cultural Heritage Society to create an artwork for a small urban park near several under-recognized African American cultural sites. The partnerships have, prior to this, utilized a planning grant, worked with a consultant, art consultant, to create a plan to move forward with a sculpture project for the park. Residents were engaged, community residents were engaged in that process, and they helped pick both the theme for the project and the idea for a modern approach to the artwork. The selection process chose artist Rodney Carroll. He has met with community members several times, and we are at a point where they have decided on a sculpture that will be an interpretation of the bones of the forearm. This will be in stainless steel and copper plate, approximately 19 feet long. And the park, the idea for the park is to bring attention to underutilized, underserved areas, specifically to historical African-American cemeteries, one of which was destroyed. So the idea for the sculpture is that it is a modern, somewhat abstract interpretation of a forearm, with the idea being that the bones of the forearm share the load, allow humans to work together. There is a lot of thought that's been put into the symbolic meaning of the forearm and the bones of the forearm, with a connection to the community and these historic cemeteries.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Okay.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I just wanted to say that in terms of community development, there will be an opportunity for the community to contribute phrases or words that are meaningful to them, and that those will be included into the pavers around the sculpture. In terms of any other points on the rubric, I felt that the everything was very clear and well kind of clarified. And the only recommendation that I have noted is that it would be helpful for visualizing the project if there were renderings of the proposed sculpture in the park setting, so that we could see what that might look like.
I was going to add, I found the extensive description of the finished project to be really helpful.
Yeah, I felt that it was an excellent application with the artistic materials presented. It was very clear. Everything was emphasizing their mission, and I think that encompassed it very well.
My only other comment was being that the pavers that are going to have the community input potentially inscribed on them, being that that's such an important part of the community component, I would have enjoyed seeing more renderings of what that aspect of the sculpture would look like, the overall sculpture site.
I had also noted the visualization of the piece as installed would be helpful, and I recommended a little bit more detail in terms of public engagement activities or events.
So my recommendation with a lot of projects of this scale is to, if not include detailed information, to make sure that you are acknowledging that there is engineering and inspection done with the technical aspects of the work. And this has just knowing, in this case, I happen to know the fabricator who's doing the work, and this artist has like an established history of working in that scale. But when putting together applications like this, especially for public entities, a lot of them have requirements for structural engineering, and including that in the plan.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment?
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
Are we waiting on me?
No, we're good. I am working on averaging the final scores.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't supposed to be talking.
All right, and the average final score is 95.67%. Before we move on, I just wanted to acknowledge panelists. We're off to a great start. Thanks for letting us roll straight into the first review. Just a quick reminder that your scoring should be based on the information provided in the application against the rubric. And to, if you could please frame your responses as recommendations. Just a reminder again about that. Thank you so much. All right, so next up, please open application ID 2023-23507, submitted by the Adkins Arboretum. The average initial score is 94.5%. Lead reader, Christian, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is a grant for commissioning a kind of hybrid mural project folded into a larger architectural endeavor for Adkins Arboretum, which is on Maryland's Eastern Shore, kind of near Tuckahoe State Park. The mural is to be created using a combination of clay and embedded, I think, glass materials to create sort of like a hybrid of like bas relief and stained glass. These are to be put together in panels in what would sort of function in the windows of a like larger folly in the Arboretum's park. It's meant to, the the location is meant to serve as a like collecting and reflective place, as well as a potential venue for, sort of like cultural events and programming that the Arboretum hosts. The artist creating the work utilized planning grant for a series of like test firings and like prototyping this process, which is described as being not necessarily like archival or ancient, but something that's like a more historic process that's maybe not totally preserved anymore. And through the course of their experimentation, sort of demonstrated feasibility. The construction details go into a lot of the methods where
Thank
you
you,
would.
panelists. Time is up.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion. Starting now, Christian, feel free to complete your thought there if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just really impressed with the amount of planning that went into generating the grant, and I wanted to say that it is rolled into a larger project, but that the larger like construction project is separately funded from the artwork going inside of it. And that the theme of the artwork is relative to the location, including like plants and a lot of the like local and native plants and animal species that the Arboretum supports. That's it.
No, I agreed with everything Christian was saying. The artwork was amazing. The details were fully understandable. I did have one recommendation on the timeline. It would have been my recommendation to have a little bit more of the community engagement listed in the timeline would be helpful. I know that the participation, they were fully, writing everything that they were going to be working with Adkins and engaging on those opportunities, and then having public input. So possibly having when those meetings might be, or just incorporating a little bit more of the community on the timeline would have been helpful. But other than that, everything looked like a solid application. Thank you.
I basically had the same recommendation. I was looking for a little more detail on the timeline about some of the components, like the sourcing of the poetry and when these things would actually be happening along. But the project is really well articulated. I liked the testing of the materials and the involvement, a complex collaboration that seems to, with community components, that seems to be really well thought out in terms of the way everyone's going to work together.
I also noted that it was very helpful to have those process photos of the glass material included, since that is a process that some of us might be less familiar with. Having the process photos was really helpful. And I appreciate the collaboration with the local poets and writers. I thought that that was a good way of intertwining the disciplines.
Time is up.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
All right, folks, if you
By
could
the
make
way-
sure you,
I'm sorry. Can you hear the alarm, by the way?
the alarm.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, we can hear it a little bit.
Oh, okay, great. No, so I'm trying to figure out a new system. Thank you.
Okay, great. Panelists, if you could just make sure you hit the complete button. Christian, I'm still seeing yours in final review, so you may have clicked the save draft button, but I need you to hit the complete button.
Sorry, the application isn't showing up on my pending final reviews.
Okay, is it in your, okay, it must be in your submitted section then. Okay, I still see the score that you had input, so I'll run with that. Thank you.
Yep.
And the average final score is 94.67%. Next up. Please open application ID 2023-23970, submitted by the Frederick Community College. The average initial score is 95.5%. Lead reader, Gail, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. Yes, so Frederick Community College is requesting the grant to collaborate with and commission artist Thomas Sterner to fabricate a larger-than-life sculpture entitled Growth. And this represents a sycamore tree and a seed pod. The plan is to install the sculpture in front of their Visual and Performing Arts Center. And that was actually through a survey that they put out through the community to find out which place was most favored. So they chose that Visual and Performing Arts Center, and with many sycamore trees on the campus, the sculpture would emphasize their connection with the sycamore growth and the college mission of their motto, moving forward and progress. It is a beautifully reinforcement of their mission back and forth. I think the promoting that progress is excellent in that sycamore, and it should, I think, inspire many. The artist design and drawings presented are very informative, and they were professional, clear, describe the plan. I can follow the design, and the structure was excellent in, following the rubric. I think everything was listed. The seed pod was large enough to sit on, so it incorporates some community there to have that engagement, and that spiral pattern would be fun. And I enjoyed the puzzle they have. It's going to be with poems. The artist is going to begin the poem and have it stamped, and then it will be completed within the community, having it through the campus community, adding with that collaboration, and completed. The poem will be completed. The specific plan and artwork the maintenance was excellent, and the budget seemed to be well planned in a timely manner. I did think that possibly my recommendation on the timeline would add a little bit more of that community. When is the poem going to be established, and adding just a little bit more on that timeline is my only recommendation.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I agree. I thought this was a strong application, and I really appreciated seeing the digital rendering of the artwork in the space and how it would fit in on their campus grounds.
My recommendation was that I felt like, I got a great understanding from the whole application, but there were some things that were addressed in the timeline, like the academic involvement of the involvement of the academic community, that could have had some more detail in the narrative. It would have been helpful to me to understand that a little bit better, what I was seeing happening on the timeline. And I always look for, in terms of care and maintenance, a little more detail than, just who is going to be responsible, but some information on materials and their specific care needs, as well as, the surrounding landscape. So I would have liked to know a little bit more about what would be in that care manual that would be provided to the college.
I would recommend more information regarding the gumball in the work. It seems to be the like central, like the main focus point of the artwork, both what's on the ground level, accessible to viewers, as well as integrating the poetry and text. Seems like it's a kind of the crux of the work, and in the renderings, a lot more detail is paid to the we call the canopy. And so, yeah, just more information, maybe visually, about how that's supposed to work out aesthetically. It's not clear from the digital rendering. It looks like there's some sort of surface texture or something that's in there in the model, but maybe just some detail shots of like what that's going to look like, because that, I think, would be one of the main interfaces for the work. Otherwise, great. I thought the same thing. Well thought out. Seems planned.
All right, panelists, any additional questions, thoughts, recommendations? If not, Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comments.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 95.83%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24172, submitted by Southeast Community Development. The average initial score is 93.83%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is, as you said, Southeast Community Development has done this application, and it is for a $50,000 project grant for a group of artists, 3 artists working together to create Brush Mural Fest. And there were really, one of the strengths of the application, I think, was the articulation of the goals. They have a goal to be Baltimore City focused, to provide opportunities for muralists to showcase their artwork and have creative freedom, and to advocate for the value of murals and provide education on how to run a mural business. So there is a mentorship component involved in this project as well. There's significant experience amongst the 3 artists who are organizing Brush Fest, and one of the things that I found interesting about this is that the project involves 5 different walls, 5 different murals, and they have different community approaches for each mural. So it's not like they're doing a sort of cookie cutter thing. They're thinking about the location of the mural and what way to engage the community in that specific location. I thought it was a well-conceived project with extensive collaboration. I like the mentorship component. I think that there might be a little bit less information in the application on the how the particular murals interact with their locations, but I do like these different approaches. I had a recommendation that a little more context on the relevance of the murals to the communities would be useful. It's hard to know, with all 5 walls and different property owners, it's hard to know how committed in the long term the property owners will be.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion starting now. Sarah, feel free to complete your thought there.
Yes, it's hard to know how committed the individual property owners will be to long-term care, but I think that's probably not unusual to murals themselves. I thought it was a polished, professional, and ambitious plan. I did have a recommendation that, the varied artists involved have different stipends, and I wasn't sure whether the stipends were related to the size of the wall they were painting, the complexity of their design, or their expertise. So maybe a little more information in the budget about how those amounts were conveyed. Good timeline. I'll let others talk.
I can say in my notes here I have that it looked to me like the timeline was aggressive, or like kind of maybe rushed. There's nothing in the application that says that they're not already doing like planning for this, and obviously their portfolio submission, the artists clearly have ideas that are well drawn out and thought out. So there's definitely some groundwork that's already being laid, and my recommendation would be to potentially include that information in the timeline just for frame of reference, so that the like schedule moving ahead of like grant recipient doesn't feel like we're starting from ground zero, or from like from the very initial stages, that the project is sort of already underway.
Maybe I'm incorrect on saying this, but in the timeline, I do see the planning grant that they had already applied for, and they have that information with inviting and receiving all those letters of commitment. So am I incorrect on that statement?
No, I don't think you're incorrect on it. I just felt like starting the project up, applying for permits and things like that, starting in July seems rushed. Not necessarily the like planning part of it, but the
yeah.
But it's like what I'm just saying that like including that information is like what's already underway, what they're able to do, with the funding they have versus like what their plan is moving forward. And I'm not discounting the application anyway. That's just I'm looking for recommendations.
I was very excited about the portion of the process that will be open. They describe it as an open Q&A. I think the idea of utilizing this public art project as a way to try to inspire younger people who may want to pursue a creative outlet or may never thought about pursuing a creative outlet is a great way of engaging future artists. So I really appreciated that.
Yes, and I also want to commend them for having like a really broad reach and scope in the project, like touching on a whole bunch of different aspects of the community in both planning and impact through like site, location, and involvement. I thought that was a really nice thing.
Yes, I agree. I think the diversity of the artists and the art styles, I think, will be.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
All right, thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yes, I just want to say in regards to schedule that applicants in their schedule are to identify the activities that would be supported by an MSAC grant as starting after notification. So securing permits, obviously they'd need to have know that they have an award before that they secure that permit. But I think there's sufficient time in their schedule for that to be secured. So I just wanted to, there's certainly been planning without MSAC support throughout, the spring, but the official MSAC supported activities start after notification if they're awarded.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up. And the average final score is 94%. Next, please open application ID 20. This is not the right. Can we go to the next screen, please? Please open application ID 2023-24198, submitted by the Havre de Grace Arts Collective. The average initial score is 95%. Lead reader, Sarah Caparelletti, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this grant is submitted by an artist collaboration, 2 artists, for a sculpture that will be in Havre de Grace. They are looking to have the sculpture be placed by the water as part of the sculpture trail. And the collaborative team, there's a lot of information in the project description about how the artwork was selected. The public and the community had a chance to review the works that were submitted for selection. And this piece will be going to the North Park, so the north end of the city, and will sort of lead, it will be kind of an anchor for the sculpture trail. I found from their application, I thought that the description was really detailed and showed kind of all of the input that went into the location and the placement and the materials for the design. They talked about the city having oversight for the work, which I thought made sense because they maintain many of the other public artworks that are in the sculpture area there. And the artist team has worked together before, so their images of previous work show that seems feasible that they could complete this project. And I found the budget and the timeline also both strong. And their drawings were very helpful. I think the digital rendering was useful just to understand the work, its placement, and how the materials were going to fit together.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, or maybe to clarify, I have the application being from the Arts Collective and not the artist team. The artist team was a selected artist, they're not the actual applicants. Am I reading that incorrectly?
No, I think that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure that I have my ducks in a row. I wasn't
Yes.
not trying to be critical. But yeah, I think as well, like one of the things that stands out in this application for me is the way that the Arts Collective has presented step by step the like planning, community involvement, input process, and what how this artwork fits into the scope of the larger endeavor for the arts initiative there.
I did like that they discussed in discussion of experience and qualifications that they discussed their experience as well as the artist's experience. That's not always the case when we read these proposals. So I liked that. I'm going to say the same thing I said about another application. I would have recommended we're looking at the rubric in terms of artwork maintenance and responsibility with various things to think about: theft, vandalism, durability, and seasonal exposure. And I would recommend more specificity in terms of the specific needs of this sculpture and site rather than focusing on solely on who's responsible for the care. And I think the other, I thought the budget was relatively broad, and I would have liked to have seen, I would have recommended a more detailed breakdown of time and materials.
I had that same recommendation about time and materials, and just a little bit more of a breakdown. It seems it was grouped into one, but excellent. I agree with everyone else who has spoken so far.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment?
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 94.83%. Next. Please open application ID 2023-24205, submitted by Historic Frostburg, a Main Street, Maryland community. The average initial score is 94.5%. Lead reader, Perrin, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So Historic Frostburg, in collaboration with the Brownsville Project, hopes to create a sculptural artwork to celebrate the contributions of the Brownsville community. This was a community of freed and formerly enslaved people. The project will honor the descendants of that community while taking as its genesis the role of Tamar Brown, who was the first person to purchase a lot of land. The sculpture will depict an image of the original plot of land in a modern aesthetic. The sunlight, as it moves across the sculpture, will play an important role in the whole overall effect, illuminating some of the colored areas, the translucent areas, and also casting a shadow of the number 1 onto the ground. The community was involved in the deciding on how they wanted to go forward with this memorial project. And particularly, they were interested in having a modern aesthetic for this piece. And the descendants' names will be stamped on the sculpture, and during a community event, contemporary descendants will have the opportunity to stamp their own names onto the piece, which will add to the legacy and also create a sense of ownership and recognition for those current people living in that community. I think that this is a well-conceived project. I appreciate the approach of tackling a historic site with a modern artwork, a modernly aesthetic artwork. In terms of the rubric, I felt that the all of the different areas were described well, the maintenance described. I really felt that this was a well-conceived.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Thank you, panelists. We now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion. Starting now, Perrin, feel free to complete your thought there.
Just that it was a well-conceived application.
I was impressed by the extensive community involvement and felt that the goals and the relevance were very clear for this. Renderings were very thorough.
I would make a recommendation that money in the budget be allocated for or line item presented for structural engineering or physical engineer stamp for either the mounting, the sculpture, or both. Or that sometimes is required with public entities, but is always a good idea when placing things in the public sphere.
I also had a budget comment, which was recommending further breakdown with a little bit more specificity. So I think the T-shirts are in there at $1,000, and it would be nice to know, how many T-shirts that is and how the artist fee maybe breaks down to the various sort of tasks along the way rather than as one lump.
Yes, that's exactly what I was just going to say. I had written that down as a recommendation of expanding on details within that. But I did appreciate the applicant did an excellent job of sharing the long, strong history and the programs involving the community. And I thought that was excellent with the decision making, incorporating them and having that ownership with the stamping. An excellent first line, by the way, for reading all of these grants. Thank you for putting it right out there. So just putting it on the side. But I appreciated the concept, honoring the history, and yes, bringing this modern piece into that area is going to be, it would be a nice touch. But expanding possibly on the budget to help us understand those numbers would be great. Thank you.
My other recommendation that I had noted, while I think that there are some images of prior projects, I would have recommended some stronger information in the narrative connecting the artist to ambitious large-scale projects that were
Thank you,
similar.
panelists. Time is up.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 94.67%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24316, submitted by Annapolis the Beautiful. The average initial score is 91.17%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Okay, so Annapolis the Beautiful has submitted this application for $50,000 for a New Works project grant. The group, Annapolis Art Walk is the name of the artist, and it is for a project in a highly utilized, visible parking facility that is seen as being key to part of a larger neighborhood revitalization project. They did receive a $10,000 planning grant and worked with various city entities and local organizations to develop themes for this project. I think it's kind of fun. I had no clue that sea shanties were a social media thing. And so working with this idea of sea shanties as a theme rose to the surface through their conversations. I thought that the relevance and goals were well articulated, that there were ambitious plans for engaging the Naval Academy and St. John's, as well as local history collections and curators to help with content. They talk about something called Activate Gorman Street, which I would have liked to have understood a little bit more broadly. And I think a missing piece might, great collaborators they've already mentioned. It's a complex, there's expertise in the group. They have completed other complex projects, although this seems perhaps bigger and more complex. And it was difficult to, the renderings didn't really help me as well as they sometimes do, I think, because some of the material is going to be sourced. So it's really difficult to know exactly, what it's going to, that this collage will look like. The complex nature of the project makes visualizing the end collage a bit difficult. So maybe some larger sort of sample sections in the renderings would have been helpful. But I thought that the budget reflected very thorough thinking, and the timeline and budget worked pretty well together. They seem to understand the complexity of the project, and they are going to need additional funding, and seem to have an approach for that as well.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
Sarah, I do have one question. Could you please restate your Gorman, the street information? It cut out on my end of the
Sure. They talk in the grant about a project, this neighborhood revitalization project, and refer to Activate Gorman Street, and that this would be sort of part of this larger Activate Gorman Street. And I would have liked just a couple sentences, maybe giving me a little more background on that.
Thanks, Sarah. I agree. And the drawings and everything listed was just incredible work that you can see that was put into all of the draftsmanship and everything. But I think I would appreciate details of the actual material and see how it is the fabrication. Other than that, it's extremely well articulated, supported with clear descriptions and goals for the community. And yeah, I agree. This sea shanty was very cool to see. I live in Annapolis, so this is exciting to hear a lot about. My daughter would love it. So I'm excited if this does occur and to see it. They did have a strong plan, but then again, I would like a little expansion on the actual material. I'd like to hear Christian's point of view.
I think material, it's sound. The material they're proposing, it's permanent, pretty industry standard laser cut metal. My recommendation for the application for the community involvement would come from a stronger place. if Art Walk had a demonstrated history of, it's unclear what their sort of mission is. It seems like a company that commissions artworks from one particular organization, which is the Art at Large group. And so I don't see a lot of community involvement in the planning side of things, or in the design of the artwork. It seems like a lot of the community effort is going to be on the back end.
I wanted to also echo the comments earlier about the drawings, including installation information. So there really aren't any dimensions noted in the design drawings, or information about how the work is installed, and that would be helpful for us visualizing the project.
I would also suggest, just to follow up on that comment, that a lot of the details with attachment points to buildings are going to be sorted out later in the process, and would be subject to almost certainly engineering requirements, which is, so that's okay, I think.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment?
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 89.83%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24327, submitted by Salisbury Arts and Entertainment District. The average initial score is 93.17%. Lead reader Christian will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is an application from Salisbury A&E district. This is a project similar to what I feel like it's a fairly common municipal art project with the decoration of what would otherwise be like city infrastructure, in this case electric box panels. The applicant held a open call submission for ideas and has finalized or selected artists to complete this sort of, I would refer to them as a mural, but I guess it's like sort of in 3D space, and some of the proposals definitely capitalize on the dimensionality of the box. Things that the Arts and Entertainment District is responsible for maintenance, and it seems like the durability is built into the plan from the original painting forward, with like good plans for archival materials, UV resistance. They sort of acknowledge that this is a reworking of an earlier project, which was successful. So I think they also know that there is some limited scope for the lifespan of the artworks. In relation to the artists selected, it's a varying degree of experience. Some definitely more experience with others, as demonstrated in their submissions. However, the scope of the project, being as simple as it is, I think serves as a good gateway for people who are trying to get into public art as a field. So I don't think that the scope is prohibitive in any way to less experienced applicants. And the budget is laid out with ample contingency. The budget covers 8 power boxes with commissions to each artist, as well as it seems like line items for materials, which is nice that the material for these projects isn't coming out of the artist stipend. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I agreed. I thought it was a strong application. I especially appreciated in the maintenance section that they specifically described different types of maintenance they would do based on the box location. So if it was facing the road or near the water. So I thought that was an important note that they made. And I agree. I think the diversity of the artists and the unique designs is helpful for letting many artists have a voice in this project.
I thought they made particularly careful efforts to involve community preferences and what they are planning. And again, just like you, Sarah, I appreciated the different needs of the different locations and landscape in terms of landscaping and exposure. That was great. I think the artists all seem perfectly well qualified. I think I would have appreciated a little bit more direct discussion of the specific needs of this project, as opposed to, just seeing photographs of prior work. But generally, everything seemed reasonable. They seem to have a clear idea of what needs to be done and how to do it.
I think that this proposal also is a great follow up to the planning grant. The way that they initiated, planned, put in action, received the calls and are in place. It just seems like a model workflow. I don't know that that's on rubric, but I noticed that when I was reviewing.
Yes, and I I agreed with all of the above. The only thing I did have a recommendation for was the expansion of prior experience, because I know we see the URL link, but it's not something we can look into and as a panelist. So having a little bit more information regarding that, the images did help, but having an expansion of the dialogue would be great.
All right, panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations?
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
All right, thanks, Lisa and Ryan. As the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
I just want to add on Christian's comment, the entry point, the emerging artists that are included in this project, sometimes they don't have as extensive background work to include in that section of the application. So these painted boxes are a great first project for emerging artists in public art.
All
Definitely.
right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now. And the average final score is 93.83%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24329, submitted by Herbert Massey. The average initial score is 94%. Lead reader Sarah Caporaletti will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So yes, this grant was submitted by an independent artist, Herbert Massey, for Gwynn Oak, Maryland. And the public art piece is going to be a sculpture that is celebrating the 60th anniversary of the desegregation of the park. And this is an area in Baltimore County. And so the main image on the public art is going to be honoring Sharon Langley, which was she was a little girl. She was the first Black child to be admitted to the park after the desegregation, and she rode the carousel. So the main anchoring image for the project will be the image of her riding the carousel, and it's going to be sort of a mosaic project that will have photos from the community implemented into into the piece. There is an extensive description of the project, which I found very helpful. It notes the goals and how the community has been a part of the planning and how they will continue to contribute to the overall idea and be a part of the photographic element of the mosaic. I thought that the maintenance was clear. The artist has a background of creating public art, so there's I thought evidence that he would be able to carry out the project. And I thought the budget and the schedule were also clear. The drawings were detailed, but I thought that they were a bit, just a little bit confusing just because they were hand drawn. So I understood the idea of the project, but I think would have liked a little bit more. I feel like I got more from the description of the project than the drawings itself.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I would recommend two things: a reconsideration of some of the materials included, especially in the support structure, just in the interest of longevity and archival quality. The construction seems to make extensive use of wood, which is strong enough in its own right, but there are other material choices or treatments that may have to go into that in order to meet archival concerns. Additionally, in the same vein with like engineering, I would definitely make sure that, because this is going in a public space, especially one that's occupied by children, that an engineer review the construction plan as well as the anchoring system to make sure that it is not susceptible to like failure or collapse. That's it though.
And I appreciated the clear description of the educational workshops and the timeline where everything was very clearly described, very detailed, and it helped me understand the project. I agree with Sarah. There was a little bit more description about the actual piece, instead of the drawing, but it did explain, and the dialogue was excellent. So everyone's knowledge and awareness of the project seems to be known and its roots. Thank you for that. It was a good little history lesson.
I agreed with Christian about a little bit more clarification about how the sculpture is intended to be mounted would be helpful. But I also noted that having the park included in the installation of the sculpture is in conjunction with their renovation of the overall park. That part was reassuring to me. So he's getting the benefit of the park personnel.
Yes, I also have in my notes here that more details on that, as far as like either in-kind donation for site preparation would be good to have in the budget. Just some sort of like expansion on the scope that the Park Service is playing in the project is great. I think it's also really nice that they have the temporary location for the sculpture also in a public space, as opposed to just putting it in storage before it gets moved over, which may serve well as a proving ground for any of the concerns that we're raising with like longevity, structural integrity, stuff like that, and allow them to make modifications before installing in its final location.
I'll just add, I thought this was a really good timeline, schedule of activities, very strong.
Okay, I believe that's 3 minutes. So Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Sure, I'll chime in. I'm glad that the panel brought up the aspect that this application is working to achieve this project by the anniversary deadline, but then will be removed to be reinstalled later by the Parks Department once the park undergoes a more in-depth renovation master plan update, I think. And in that, the county park system will work through any of the requirements around engineering and other requirements to safely install the work in public. And I'll just bring up that while those are very important concerns for installing work in public, that engineering review is not part of our rubric as the funding support of our grant, but something that we leave up to the local municipality when they provide that support, that they will go through whatever those requirements are because they vary from place to place. Thanks.
I understand that concern, but it also raised the point that engineering constitutes a considerable amount of a budget line item. And so from a financial standpoint, the reason I bring it up is I want to make sure that the
Kristen,
artists are aware.
There can't be further comment after.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 93.67%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24363, submitted by the town of North Brentwood. The average initial score is 92.83%. Lead reader, Gail, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. Yes, the public grant would be the towns of Brentwood and North Brentwood. They are collaborating together to bring their past division of the 1950s metal crash barrier, then called a monument, into a new future. The barrier was installed to delineate the towns then, and today they would like to recreate this so that they would redo the word monument into a new sculpture supporting each other, coming together as one. The applicant did an excellent job sharing the long history, the long, strong history, current plan, and the organizational information involving the community input to create this new monument, forming that bond out of division into unification, so to speak, using the art sculpture to join the community. The grant, they're looking to support the commissioning, the artist Nehemiah Dixon and Wesley Clark to create their collaborative sculpture idea of the two hands supporting the barrier in a vertical fashion instead of a horizontal fashion, which is what that barrier was. So now taking it and flipping it on its side and putting it up. which has a wonderful quality to it. My only question and the possible recommendation I would have was that I was a little unclear about the artist's information. Wesley Clark is clearly described as one mentioned in the experience section. The other artist, Nehemiah, doesn't have that dialogue, that's description in the experience section. So I was just wondering if they could expand on that, because I'm definitely clear that it would be a team working together, but it's not fully described. And I'm just missing that information. The supplemental images are very helpful and very clear. I was just answering the rubric on that. And the only other things I had, it was demonstrates a strong feasibility to alignment with the aspects of the proposed project. Everything else looked in place.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I agreed in terms of qualifications that
I
the
think this
images.
project proposal, one of the like stronger components in there to me is the flexibility of the artist to pivot, confronted with the challenge with the cost specifically of bronze in the initial proposal. I think the solution they've come up with is definitely feasible, and outlines a good alternative with like comparable longevity and feasibility. Them moving the project to the majority of the fabrication being done in-house, I think is going to help with their timeline as well, and that it reduces the dependency on subcontractors for fabrication. The only feedback or the recommendation that I have on that is that in that scope with those changes in the budget, that I would recommend a more robust contingency line item, just because there are likely to be unknowns in making those changes. I don't know that that's true. It's just a recommendation for that based on how the proposal reads.
Sarah Hall, I believe you had started some remarks, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just echoing what Gail had said, that the images were really helpful and indicate that the artists have experience with large scale projects, but a little more narrative information sort of specifying how their qualifications would be used in this project would have been useful. I had difficulty reading the budget, and I'm not sure if there was a formula error or if it was me. But the level of thought that went into the budget clearly showed anticipation and planning. So, that could have been me. I really found the renderings detailed and exciting, and that there's a lot of work and collaboration and conversation that have gone into this project. So that all impressed me.
I noted in my notes that it would be helpful for me if there were a bit more information on the sculpture material. It sounds like a somewhat new product that they're using to keep the project in budget in terms of the cost. And so a little help in clarifying the maintenance for that new product would be illuminating for me.
Thank you. Time is up.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yeah, just to provide a little more detail here, to address the needs of their budget, they brought in Wesley Clark, more experienced artist, who brought in the fabrication company that recommended the material. And so in working with that fabrication company, I think that we're going to see a work that will, stand the test of time based on the budget that they have for this particular project.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up. All right, and the average final score is 92.83%. Next. Please open application ID 2023-24401, submitted by At the House Inc. The average initial score is 96.33%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
The application was filed by At the House Inc. for a project in collaboration with the Arlington Neighborhood Association. It is a request for $50,000 project grant, which will be to add artistic elements to 3 new gardens. It is sort of a follow-up to an earlier project in which a gateway was developed for a garden designed by Michael Bowman that was selected by the community and installed in 2019. Part of that project was the creation of these flower cutouts and additional materials that hadn't been used. And so they decided in the winter of 2023, the community association president and the artist were coming up with a way to use these flower cutouts. And so they have funding and in-kind donations that are allowing them to set up these 3 new gardens. The gardens each have specific themes. There's a jazz garden, which is inspired by Cab Calloway. There's an herb garden, and there's a salad garden. And I appreciated that there was a well-articulated history of the site, specific reasons for the new work, its goals, and its importance to the community. The description in terms of responsibility for the artwork was fairly thorough, and the materials seem readily accessible. I was interested in a little more detail about the timing of care and seasonal upkeep that would be required for this. The applicant's experience and qualifications. This is derived from an already successfully installed work, so I have confidence that this will be successful as well. The budget I thought was detailed and accurate. And the schedule was sensible, although I would have liked to have seen a little bit more specificity.
Time is done. Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now. Sarah, feel free to complete your thought there.
I thought that the works, the proposed works, and the use of the flower cutouts, as well as the designs for the other gardens, all worked nicely visually with each other and the original project, and that the drawings and the budget and the timeline all worked together well as well.
I also had a recommendation about the schedule for the project. I thought overall it was a bit vague, so I would have recommended just a bit more detail there, but it also did seem to convey feasibility of the project.
I did want to echo on Sarah saying that, yes, the professionalism and I felt that positive energy of this project and taking something from before and just knowing what to change this into and using those flower cutouts and in a very aesthetic way. The artwork is very pleasing. And it's well documented data that they had benefiting the program of the outcome for the community. I think that really works well.
Mhm.
Panelists, any additional questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, if not, Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
I just was going to say the maintenance schedule is I thought was a really nice touch in there.
I'm
The
sorry.
details in project, sorry, my mic was off.
Christian?
Or I was having a hard
Okay.
time. The details outlined in maintenance and upkeep were
Christian,
nice. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. We've moved on to the portion where Lisa and Ryan contribute.
No further comment.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 96.33%. All right, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute break here. Just wanted to acknowledge that we're running just a few minutes behind. So we'll start promptly back at 10:46. We'll see you back at 10:46 and we'll get right started at that time. And Christian, I just wanted to mention, it sounds like you might have a slight audio delay. So if you wanted to log off and come back in to help reset things, feel free to do that. Or if it helps with your bandwidth, if you want to keep your video off the whole time as well, that might help with that audio delay you might be experiencing.
Okay.
All right, panelists, the time is now 10:46. If you could either turn your video on or give me a verbal hello, let me know you're back. That would be great. I see Gail, Sarah Caparaletti, Sarah Hall, Perrin, and Christian. Thank you.
Is my sound better?
Yep, your sound's fine. We were just concerned about the sound reaching you. It sounded like there might have been a delay.
I didn't experience that. I'm clumsy with the mute button is all.
Okay. All right. We are going to get started. Please open application ID 2023-21876, submitted by the Choptank Tolomato Legacy Project. The average initial score is 96.67%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
The grant is actually a planning grant for $10,000. It is a follow-up to a successful project that they had in the fall of 2021 when they worked with residents of Baywood Village to do a community mural. The nonprofit itself, the Choptank Tolomato Legacy project, is about teaching cultural literacy through the arts, and especially underserved populations and children with learning differences using hands-on art experiences. And so they're very community-based projects in terms of bringing artists in to design and create imagery, and then working with community members to create the murals. They talked about how well the initial project worked. So they now want to create 3 4-foot by 16-foot murals in low-income rural communities in Kent, Queen Anne's, and Caroline counties. And as I read through this application, I was interested in the fact that there were multiple project goals, but the hands-on aspect to me really was full of potential for creating transformational experiences in individual lives. So often we're talking about placemaking and community, but I think this is really doing that, and also really having individual life impact. Cultural literacy, demystifying art making, and community pride are all significant parts of this project. They did submit an extensive list of community partners and contacts. I think that the schedule would maybe benefit from more specificity in terms of dates, is fairly thorough and gives evidence of a deeply considered planning process.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now. Sarah, feel free to complete your thought there.
I thought that it was an excellent budget, and I appreciated the estimate of hours as well as the detail related to meetings and supplies needed.
I agreed. I thought this was a very strong project. I think the idea of taking a successful project from one location and trying to replicate it in others is a really great idea.
I'd follow up on that sentiment with the one reservation that the multiple, like the multiple artists, multiple ideas, multiple locations is maybe larger in scope than what they're applying for here individually, and that it may be more realistic to have had 4 or 5 different applications for the different counties or entities as far as like planning is concerned. I think there's a lot of ambiguity in there, but as a planning grant, hopefully they're able to capitalize on this to like sort that out.
Yeah, I do agree with the, if you have project is pretty
Gail, you're cutting out.
so
Could you Could you pull your microphone closer?
Microphone? Input one, and I would just, depending for some
Gail,
projects,
I'm so sorry. You're still kind
same
of
set.
cutting in and out. I might suggest maybe turning your video off and see
Okay.
if that helps with your bandwidth. Can you try speaking now?
No problem. No problem. Is that working?
It still seems to be cutting in and out.
Okay.
If you want to try, we'll pause the clock. So if you want to try logging back out and in, we can pause for just a moment here.
I'm trying this one. How is that? Can you hear me now? A little better?
Oh yeah, this sounds a lot better.
Okay. Yeah, you wonder sometimes when you log out. But just to explain with the planning grant, yes, having one for larger projects, you tend to have the same process that you're doing for each one. So having one planning grant to understand and then possibly going for multiple projects maybe is later, but the planning makes sense for this. I really appreciate the community engagement. It's wonderful to engage with these anyone and bringing in all folks instead of saying it's for certain communities. Anyone is invited, and I think that's just a terrific way that they're doing it.
I will just add in and amplify that thought that yes, I appreciated that the whole point of this project is really about the communities and engaging them in the artwork process, so that it's almost that the process is as important, if not more important, than the final piece of artwork.
I agree. That's what I was trying to say. Thank you for saying it better.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 96.67%. Before we move on, panelists, I neglected to make this comment, but as you have noticed, we have moved on to the reviews of the new artworks planning grants. So just noting that shift in the rubric criteria and the discussions moving forward. All right, next up. Please open application ID 2023-22815, submitted by Towson University. The average initial score is 94.67%. Lead reader, Perrin, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is an application for a planning grant from Towson University. This grant would support a call for artists, an RFP, to create an artwork for their newly renovated academic commons area. This is a part of their library, and they feel like it's missing that critical and kind of inviting piece of visually dynamic artwork to create a welcoming environment for the students and the faculty, people who use the space. They have already hired an art consultant to guide the process and identify the opportunities for this common space. There's an extensive description of the community engagement steps, including various means of community engagement, town hall style events, making sure to include students, and particularly engaging the students on the themes that they feel would be important for that artwork. They're planning to run the RFP through the Alumni Association. So their goal is to attempt to engage artist alumni to apply as an interest in this work. 3 artists will be invited to submit proposals. They have included a stipend for the artists for that portion of the process. And the selection committee will include a diverse group of stakeholders, including students, both graduate and undergraduate, art faculty, administration, library administrators. So I think they've really spent a lot of time in the application outlining how they will go through this process and who they will involve. They've been very thorough in articulating who will be involved in the selection committee. I found the timeline to be very clear.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion starting now. Perrin, feel free to complete your thought there.
My only other thought was that I also found the budget to be clear and reasonable.
I just want to add that it's an RFQ versus an RFP. Not that that's a huge deal, but to me it is. I appreciate the RFQ, knowing that there's the qualifications and then going on, moving on to the RFP later. But I think they're looking for RFQs in this planning.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, an RFQ, but then it transitions to selecting 3 artists, and those artists would be invited to submit a proposal. And this particular planning grant in the budget does include a stipend for that portion of the process. So I guess it's probably a 2-part approach then, both an RFQ and an RFP.
Yes, and I appreciate that they get paid for making that proposal later. So yes, I agreed with that.
I feel that this proposal is, thorough and standard and is representative of of what you would expect from an institution as large as Towson, with the incredible amount of resources that are available to it. I think that should be put in context as well.
I did feel like it was a very thorough plan. I liked the community involvement, in many layers. It's logical that they would be looking for an alum to do the project. I thought the details of of the project participants and their roles were appreciated. My one budget question was about the consultant fee, which is in there. And I wondered whether that was based on the project as a whole or whether that was an hourly fee. Just wondering where that number came from.
Panelists, any additional questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, if not, Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Sure. Thank you. I just want to note that the size of the institution and their budget is not part of the rubric that we're judging against, and this project is outside of their other capital development that might include public art. So they organized for this funding as an independent project of the capital construction that happens on campus. Thank you.
And just a reminder that consultants are an eligible expense, so they identify that through the people they hire.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
Can I just quickly ask, is it okay to keep the my video off just so that my sound works? If you want my
Yeah.
video on, just let me know and I'll just pop it back on. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine and up to you.
Okay, thank you.
And the average final score is 97%. Next, please open application ID 2023-22896, submitted by the Metropolitan Center for the Visual Arts. The average initial score is 90.67%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
This is a planning grant with a request for $10,000. The Metropolitan Center for the Visual Arts calls itself Viz Arts throughout the application, and they are working to help Rockville in particular create a stronger sense of place. And so they are Looking at the Lincoln Park Community Center in a historically African-American neighborhood, what brought VisArts in to explore a new community mural on a building overlooking the playground. They are looking for this planning grant, and they have some goals for that process, which include making sure that it's a fair and respectful process for the design, reflecting the diversity of the community, involving the community from the beginning, as they have discussions with the planners, help select the artists and participate in mural creation, and strengthening their own role as a resource for their clients, and helping to build relationships and the capacity of local artists. So I felt that the goals of the project were clearly defined for facilitating the community participation and the artist selection process, and that the artist selection process itself was described clearly. The timeline, I recommend that the timeline be more specifically broken down by date and task and less narrative, although narrative detail can be very welcome. I found it a little bit more difficult in this proposal. For example, the budget identifies 4 meetings, and it would be nice to know where those meetings fall along the timeline. And the budget itself was relatively detailed, I think, and feasible budget for this project.
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I appreciated that the VisArts is recognizing that many of the public art RFQ and RFPs in Rockville are run, in their words, top down with little public interaction, and that VisArts' goal is to kind of flip that script and have it be engaging in projects that will have a wider community part of the process. So I appreciated that they specifically recognize that.
I agree. I also appreciated the opportunity of having emerging artists with an established one, fostering the growth and community.
I have a little bit of unclarity, or just questions about the clarity in here relating to RFP, RFQ. As I read the proposal, it seems like the plan is to release an RFP, so a request for proposals for artwork, and then select 3 semi-finalists from that proposal. That practice can sometimes be interpreted as what's called spec work, which is asking artists to do their work on the front end and then awarding only the top contenders, or compensating only the top contenders for the work that they've done. So I might advise thinking about how they get to their semifinal selection process, and if they're planning to work with emerging artists in that, aiding them in, or providing some sort of support for helping them put together the application for public art where they may be lacking in the qualification or experience.
I fully agree. Well said.
I will note that the budget does include a stipend for the artists who are selected, the semifinalists, with an additional amount for the winning artist.
Yes, but generally in an RFP, you're asking for proposals broadly, which is how the thing is put out. So like that practice of only awarding or selecting semifinalists from proposals can be seen as exploitative of the other applicants who put in hard work to design, prepare, create drawings and things like that, or whatever the demands for an RFP are, and then are not compensated for that work. You're only compensating the winners. So it's not unheard of in the industry. It just can be seen as like problematic. And since they're in the planning stage, they should be able to revise their plan accordingly to make sure that
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
Thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yes, Christian's points are taken, but we do want to emphasize that either process is open to any applicant. We don't dictate how the organization applies. Perhaps they might have even gotten confused with the difference between RFP and RFQ, which is understandable for an organization new to doing this process.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 92%. Next, please open application ID 2023-22902, submitted by the Brewers Hill Neighbors. The average initial score is 90.67%. Lead reader, Christian, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is an application for planning for a mural to serve as like a placemaker or a sort of like welcome sign, like for the Brewers Hill neighborhood. It's designed to foster like community engagement and identifying with the space to create sort of like a sense of home, and ideally to they describe a sort of goal with rejuvenation as well, for new businesses, residences, things of that nature. The planning process states active engagement with the residents of the neighborhood. So it's about what they think of their home. And it basically outlines putting together a call for artists and rubric for assessing the merits of different proposals, with the majority of the budget going towards honoraria for putting together those proposals. Public is integrated along each step of the process in both like planning as well as review of applications. And the timeline is fairly extensive, seems very comfortable with RFP or RFQ being released in October and moving through into what looks like the spring, planning for project grant in June, or a project grant in March 2024. So I think that they've left a lot of timeline in their budget for that kind of community planning and involvement.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I would follow up that while I would generally encourage as much work to go to artists as possible, it does seem like there may be more administrative fees than are what are outlined in the budget, and that potentially having contingency to cover those might be useful.
Time is up.
We are in the discussion period. So panelists, please chime in with any other discussion points. We've still got a couple minutes here.
I did have a couple of notes about, there were a lot of meetings maybe listing in the timeline just to justify all the fees. I think there was a bit of confusion for me on the budget.
I also had a question about the budget, which was that I don't see that they've set money aside in the budget to actually run the call for artists. They do note that they've already received a grant and maybe money from that will cover the administration of running the call. But I didn't see that articulated, and that could be helpful in understanding how they're going to run the process.
Yes, I had the same question. It was the RFQ costs and the admin costs weren't clearly defined. Yeah, thank you. Though I did appreciate the relaxed timeline and no pressure on trying to get these. It takes time to do these designs and finding artists. So thank you for that.
All right. Okay, thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
I think the intention is to be commended with this small organization breaking into public art and the very large fees that they're allocating to the artists being involved in the process, and the numerous community meetings and time that it takes to plan and discuss a proposed work with the community. So I just want to provide that context.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments, if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 90.67%. Next, please open application ID 2023-23464, submitted by the Talbot County Public Schools. The average initial score is 93.67%. Lead reader, Gail, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. I put on the video, just we'll see how this goes. Let me know if the sound isn't right, but we have a planning grant for $10,000 at Talbot County Public Schools. Their committee for public artworks is in need of funding or hiring a project manager consultant to help implement a public art plan for their Easton Elementary School. They have met a few times since January to discuss what type of public art they would be looking for, and they want this on the Easton Elementary campus. And through these meetings, it became apparent to them they needed a project planning manager to carry out the important tasks, since they are looking for significant community input. They have 3 projects in mind, from possible mural on a basketball blacktop, outdoor interactive musical structure, and a historical piece that tells the school's history. The funding is going to help the committee choose a planning manager who will then conduct the public meetings and provide their expertise on planning the public artworks, and call for artists, assist the artist selection, and work with the artists to begin the project grant application. The application is very clear. I appreciate the artist honorariums that were present, so the artists will be paid, which is great, as well as the consultant fees included. The open call for artists is a little vague, but I'm sure this will be fine-tuned by the art consultant once they hire this person. And the timeline seems a little tight at the moment, but I have a feeling this might be changed through the art consultant when they find someone. So those are my questions. Because it does seem tight looking for an artist and then having that selection and then writing for the project grant is very close. And those are my thoughts going forward.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I also would recommend, or I would suggest that a lot of the budget issues would be advised from an art consultant. The 400, I think that the honorarium compensation for proposals comes out to about $400 per artist, which is relatively low. And so if they're looking for 9 different proposals, fully developed proposals, that depending on the scope of what they're asking for, that may be problematic.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right. If not, Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Just that we can't tell the applicant what to charge for a proposal fee. So artists will respond or they won't respond depending on the fee or the project.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 93.33%. Next, please open application ID 2023-23480, submitted by the Easton Economic Development Corp. The average initial score is 90.67%. Lead reader Sarah Hall will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So the Eastern Economic Development Corp is partnering with the town of Easton to request $10,000 to help develop for the town of Easton a public art master plan. There is a desire, they've seen the way well thought out plans have benefited other communities, and they want to promote and implement the installation of public art to enrich the community. They have some specific sort of sub goals or issues that they want to be resolved through the plan, like helping to lay the groundwork for artists who want to create and display work, helping to plan, think through locations where public art could be, also wanting to make sure that there's representation of a variety of forms and styles, and being inclusive to reflect the community. They have formed an advisory board, which includes council president, the town's director of planning, zoning, county arts council representative, a number of people, director of the Academy Art Museum, art supporters. They also have started to get bids from consultants to help create the master plan. I thought that the desire for the master plan and the benefits were well articulated. They're looking for help with the consulting costs. They've already started with getting bids. The stakeholder representatives on the advisory board are, it seems pretty well represented. There was something in the project description. There's an acronym in there. I think it might have been for zoning, maybe Z/S. My recommendation was don't use acronyms and in your applications, because people don't always know what acronyms stand for. There are a lot of ideas to address, and was that the timer?
Yes, that was the time. Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I was going to say I recommended a little more specificity in the timeline in terms of how the community groups are folded in. Are there separate meetings at different senior centers? I think there's a lot of ambition here, but a lot of layers of interaction that could do with some more definition for how they happen.
I had a similar recommendation for the timeline. I felt that it was very detailed and thorough, but I thought that some of the larger goals could have been broken down a bit more.
I think that it's in their budget. It's encouraging to see this application rolled into a larger initiative with buy-in from a variety of different interested entities. I should frame that not in a financial standpoint, but in the community input perspective. It seems like they have done a lot of groundwork and established commitment from a lot of interested parties.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations?
All right, if not, Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No comment?
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now. And the average final score is 92%. Next. Please open application ID 2023-24269, submitted by Elaine Weiner-Reed. The average initial score is 91%. Lead reader, Sarah Caparaletti, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is a planning grant submitted to focus on public art for senior centers in Anne Arundel County. And the idea is to have conversations and develop ideas for public art that could be a part of these senior center communities. Mainly their goals are focusing on showing how diversity enriches the community and creating work that celebrates the lives that these people have lived and the diverse backgrounds that they have brought to communities and our shared history. I thought that the project planning process was very detailed. The application goes into a lot of information about sort of the genesis of the project, the overall focus, and the goals, which they broke down into kind of the long-term goals and short-term, which I really appreciated, kind of seeing the extent of the project and how far they've thought through what it will achieve. They also have a lot of goals to work with the community. They really want to focus on, in their meetings, collecting stories and using that information to develop what the art could focus on. And so they're bringing in many parts of the community to be involved and to learn to make it engaging. So I think that overall, that's a very strong process to have many involved. I found the timeline to be clear and the budget as well.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
So my recommendation would be to clarify as part of the process, to clarify the term most engaged for what seems like the selection process in September, October under the timeline. Using the term most engaged is fairly abstract, and devising or coming up with some kind of benchmark or rubric for what that criteria means, especially if part of the plan is to not necessarily pit these different sites against one another, but like have different kind of competing ideas, that making sure that an equitable and outside review is integrated in there would be an important step in the process. Especially with especially with a population where accessibility may be a factor in that engagement.
I had noted as a recommendation that it took me a while to understand that the artist team had already been selected. So that kind of could have been clarified a little bit more to help us understand that now the point is to move forward and find a project site as opposed to an artist.
That was my one small point as well. It was a little vague on those specifics, and so I was just wondering.
Can you speak a little more loudly?
It's
Sorry,
okay.
hard to hear you.
No, it's okay. Is it work? I know my husband's also working in the other room on the.
That's better.
Yeah, thank you. So I did have that same question. I was just saying that it was a little vague on those specifics regarding the artist being selected, but I'm assuming that it's just they're the ones that are putting forth this planning grant to go forward.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? If not, Lisa and Ryan, as staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yeah, I just want to, add that when the application itself, the applicant says independent artist, it can go either way, that artist might be that person that's developed the idea, who's applying for the support. So just that's my ad.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now. And the average final score is 93.67%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24306, submitted by Liz Donadio. The average initial score is 91.33%. Lead reader Gail will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. Please do let me know if the sound is not working. I hope this is pretty good, but we have excellent. We have independent artists in photography, video, and sound are collaborating to research historical sites of Baltimore under neglect. They create immersive installations of light-based outdoor projections, bringing awareness to the space and its rich history, promoting preservation and recognition, and if necessary, pointing out contemporary issues of those public spaces. The team of artists are seeking funding to continue their research and plan efforts as they develop public art projects for other neglected historical landmarks of Baltimore. They had mentioned the sites of Baltimore Heritage, Enoch Pratt Free Library, and the Maryland Center for History and Culture. They also stated potential sites as examples in West Baltimore neighborhoods who were affected by the Red Line cancellation, where there are preservation efforts to restore the Hebrew Orphan Asylum and American Ice Company building. So it was an intriguing and exciting idea to create these series of installations. I feel that they definitely would heighten the awareness and the importance of that architecture and public art and the community. I appreciated their clarity and their written phrases and their timeline. Great bulleted list of activities with specific goals and outcomes, and it gave plenty of time for each phase, is what I thought. And the project budget seemed very simple and itemized and reasonable, with a clear budget goal in mind.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I was excited. I wrote, it's refreshing to have a planning grant proposal that intends to support the actual thinking work of artists. The idea that the planning isn't just for actionable events necessarily, but also the work that artists do in conceiving projects. And so I appreciated that they are attempting to utilize this grant for those purposes.
I also appreciated that this sense of research that's going to inform creativity. I had a recommendation related to the budget. It was easy to understand, but I would have liked to have seen estimated hours, and it's hard to know whether this becomes a primary focus of the artists during this time period or whether they would be engaged in other projects as well. And I was curious about the studio rent inclusion, if this is new space that they need to be able to share together, or if this is existing space. So that was my budget question. I thought the timeline was realistic. And the fact that this is related to site-specific artwork was really interesting, the investigation.
I think that I also felt that the application was a innovative interpretation of the term public art, in that it is planning oriented, but it also appears to be supporting something which is ephemeral and temporary in nature, which falls outside the scope of what is normally perceived as public art being permanent, long-standing, or object-oriented.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, if not, Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No comment.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 92.33%. Next, we are going to be moving on to the conservation implementation grants. So again, noting the shift in the rubric criteria and the discussions moving forward. All right, so please open application ID 2023-23730, submitted by the Central Baltimore Curriculum Project. The average initial score is 97%. Lead reader, Perrin, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Great. So this is a conservation grant. The idea here is to conserve the beloved sculpture titled Peely Weely. So Peely Weely is an outdoor sculpture that was originally created as part of the Baltimore Percent for Art program for the schools. In 1979, the artist Jim Paulson created this sculpture. At the time, he had a lot of engagement with the community, including allowing the students to come up with the name at the time. The sculpture is sort of interpretation of the idea of the family dog waiting outside of the school to walk the students home. This is 44 years ago. It's exciting that an artwork created for a completely different generation would continue to have such a strong relevance for today's young students. And in the conservation, they note, in addition to conserving this project, that the goal is to stand as a beacon to the other historical Percent for Art school projects, all of which, according to this grant application, are in need of some repair or, in fact, some cases missing. So they would like to use their restoration process to be a beacon for other schools to attempt to engage in that process and saving these historic artworks. The goal of the conservation would be to reduce corrosion, remove graffiti, and to add a protectant surface coating. The timeline is extraordinarily clear. The original artist would be involved with the conservation project, and the community is still thoroughly engaged with the sculpture, and it's a vital landmark for that community.
All right, thank you, Perrin. I just wanted to jump in and clarify very quickly here. There's one slight change in the slide we need to make. It should not say central. The applicant was the Baltimore Curriculum Project. So I just wanted to clarify that that is the application we are talking about currently, not to be confused with the Central Baltimore Partnership.
Thank you. I was going to ask. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So yes, we are talking about the Baltimore Curriculum Project application, and the ID is 2023-23730. So if you could make sure you're on that review, that would be great. And we also now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion starting now.
I thought it was an excellent description of the significance of the piece from multiple perspectives, and terrific that the artist is able to work with the conservation team, and that there's this educational component, an interpretive component that goes along with it, as well as documentation. And solid budget.
Yeah, I truly appreciated the strong history and the importance to the other art at Baltimore schools and the conservation need. Very well described.
I am, I'm not, I'm maybe reading more into this than I'm supposed to. One of the notes that I have on here is that the conservation plan involves replacing with steel rod or editing or, bringing up to date steel rod, which just metallurgically speaking, I'm not trying to like nerd on it, stainless steel and bronze are going to be more compatible as materials, metallurgically speaking, and also have a longer archival quality. Putting together carbon steel and bronze is potentially susceptible to accelerated corrosion as well. And that might be something worth exploring as they go about their renovation plan. Again, it's not in like great detail that's in there, and I'm sure the conservators have some scope in that, but like as a fabricator, that sticks out.
I had one other note in the budget, which just was that the original artist is going to be, this might be a note of concern outside of the rubric, but the original artist is going to be doing some of the restoration work. And I was aware that his fee is pretty small comparative to the overall grant. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that up as an area that I would have some concern with. I would want the artist to receive more money for their time.
I also would like to follow up with a second thing. One of the things I found commendable in the application was that it prioritizes children as the benefactors of public art, which in a lot of cases isn't necessarily, they can be overlooked as like minors are being underrepresented. So I think that that's really admirable. The other question that I had that was budgetary in nature is the proposal specifically outlines a
Thank you,
2-year maintenance
Kevin.
schedule,
Time is up.
and that's not
All
addressed.
right, thank you. Time is up. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the comment that as Christian and Perrin noted, the original artist and the conservators are involved, and I was part of some of the original discussions around this. And I think the artist did set his fee. He had the opportunity to notify the applicant, what his cost would be. So I think that that's been established amongst them. It wasn't an afterthought. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now. And the average final score is 97%. Next, please open application ID 2023-18309, submitted by the Central Baltimore Partnership. The average initial score is 94%. Lead reader Sarah Caparoletti will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this is a conservation grant submitted by an artist for conserving a mural in the Station North Arts District of Baltimore. The original mural was created in 2012, and it was part of a festival. And so this grant is seeking to restore the mural, and just conserve that the mural's been tagged and it's just showing signs of wear. So just looking to have the artist update the paint. And there's a couple reasons why they want to conserve this at this particular time. The current property owner is invested in seeing it restored, and the original artist is available. And there are also festivals and events coming up in the Arts District this summer that will be a good time to have the artwork ready to be seen again. And then in relation to the rubric, I just noted that the goals were well outlined, and it seemed like there's community stakeholders who are invested in the conservation as well as the artist. And for the budget, I thought that it was also detailed, and I thought that I see this in a lot of the conservation ones, that there was funding for contingencies for the project, which I just thought was a wise thing to consider.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
Oh, yeah, I really loved the outpouring of support from the community that was described in this proposal, and the very detailed images that followed, showing the tagging as well as the sun bleached mural. So it would be exciting to see this brought back to life, really, and it's a fantastic space to do it in. Everything looked very clear in the application, thorough description. I appreciated the optional note at the end of the UV and graffiti proof clear coating. I mean, that's always in contention. Many people ask if it's going to really work or not, but I'm glad they included it, and they're going to be discussing it. And I think that's something that comes up with the conservation team. So.
I thought that the significance of the mural was really well demonstrated, and its symbolic role in the community and the preservation of it being important. I was curious about, I think, the direct quote of fresh design updates mentioned in the narrative. So it sounds like this is not just going to be conservation, but that there's going to be some alteration as well. And I wondered about whether the community knew this and was supportive of this kind of updating, or if there was an expectation that it was going to be the same afterwards. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more detail about that. I liked the thoroughness of the timeline. They mentioned bathrooms even, which I don't think we've seen in any other. And I would have liked to have seen a little more detail related to activities involving the community. Because of its importance. The team is well qualified. The budget I thought was sensible. The costs reflect the sort of prominence of the artist and the significance of her work.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, if not, Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 94%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24267, submitted by the Greater Remington Improvement Association. The average initial score is 94%. Lead reader, Gail, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. Yes, so the conservation grant of 41,000 for Greater Remington Improvement Association. They are looking to restore their neighborhood's iconic alligator mural created by artist John Ellsbury to its original condition by removing overpaint and cleaning the surface and repainting the entire wall. The applicant does a great job of describing the goals and activities. They highlighted well the unique mural's history, definitely stated that several times, and brought in some great background information, and also how the art became the pride of the community with several supporting documents. I, of course, love that, all the documents that were brought in, and spent a lot of time sharing this importance and the impact of the surrounding community. But I did note that one of my suggestions is the explanation in the budget of just the project manager. They didn't actually quite explain who will be each job. So I was looking for that in the explanation. The artists and the conservation team, they make a solid partnership. I just was slightly confused and unsure of the individual jobs as they go forward. They weren't described. I'm sorry, was that time?
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I also think this application did a great job of like establishing cultural significance for the mural, or community significance, I guess, maybe both.
Yes, and I also
I
was
had
very...
one comment about testing materials or solvents, that, you know, maybe that could have happened prior to this project. I don't know.
I'm assuming that was within the conservation. They had a very extensive list of what their jobs were. That was the other, I think, that was one of my questions, but I was glad they brought back the original artist and they're going to be guiding the restoration is what I'm assuming. So I just needed a little clarity on that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, because assembling the artist crew was actually written under the conservation scope of work. So that's why I was confused with the project manager as well as the conservation and how they're working together.
All right, panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, Lisa and Ryan, as a staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I think all the comments have been very positive, but that this is a situation where the artist has himself been touching up and restoring this mural on an as-needed basis for decades and with very limited funds and usually at his own cost. So it's been a learning process for him to have the opportunity to apply for this grant and work with a professional conservator. And I think that the community, the conservator, and the artist all worked hard to put this application together.
All right, thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 96%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24339, submitted by the Oxford Community Center. The average initial score is 91%. Lead reader, Christian, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now. Christian, if you're speaking, we're unable to hear you.
My apologies. Here we go. So this is a proposal for conservation from the Oxford Community Center for rejuvenation of a 80 by 20 foot mural entitled "The Oyster Gatherers," located in Oxford, Maryland. The proposal does a really good job of outlining the importance to the community of Oxford, tying it to its historical tradition with watermen and relying on the estuary for just economic development and sustainability throughout its history. The mural's 25 years old and is in need of restoration due to fading, as well as some concerns with support and site prep from the original artwork. The organization has employed a mural specialist to oversee the restoration effort, as well as consulting with the original artist as part of like implementation of the grant, which is always good to see, to make sure that like the original intent is preserved. I think that the proposal does a very good job of incorporating a lot of, or almost entirely, local voices in their conservation team. So it demonstrates like a willingness on the part of the community to be involved because of what they perceive as the importance of the artwork. I would recommend as well that considering some exterior consultation in there may also help with just making sure that opinions are coming in from outside of the local community as well, just in the interest of like.
Time is up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now. Christian, feel free to complete your thought there.
Yeah, I was just saying in the interest of like full consideration, or just, like making sure that they're not like running in a closed loop.
I just had a few suggestions. I was looking at the description of some of the team members, tend to be just an overview, because I know they have the URLs, and I know we're unfortunately unable to go and do that kind of research. So maybe some expansion on the panelists. I mean, those involved, the team members involved, would be helpful. And I was wondering about the painting. Will the artist be brightening the mural, which would require it all to be painted? That was a little vague. I understand that there's sun bleaching in a few areas. There is rust running down over the mural from what the images show. So maybe a little bit more expansion on what exactly they're doing with. Are they painting the whole thing completely over? Because it doesn't show a lot of deterioration, but it does show some sun bleaching and then the rust.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 91%. Just a quick reminder for any observers who have joined us, please be sure your camera is turned off and that you remain on mute throughout the duration of the meeting. Thank you. Next, please open application ID 2023-24370, submitted by the Fund for Educational Excellence. The average initial score is 94%. Lead reader, Christian, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this grant is proposing the deinstallation of a relief sculpture by James E. Lewis from the New Era Academy in Baltimore, and then reinstalled after Conservation on Arundel Elementary School, also in Baltimore in the same neighborhood. This effort is being undertaken in the interest of preserving a monumental artist in Baltimore history, as well as part of a closing of one school and opening another, or the opening of another school. So the idea is to make sure that this important artwork is preserved in an uncertain future for its current location. The process involves the deinstallation of the artwork, repair of the metal in places where it's corroded, as well as like reapplication of patination for the artwork, and then reinstallation in its new location. They had the the Fund for Educational Excellence has put together a team covering all aspects of this endeavor, including metal workers, given that the original artist is sadly is not available anymore, conservationists to advise in the restoration efforts. And that's it. And then again, they prioritize the importance of both this artwork's legacy as well as accessibility for children to public art as members of the community.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I thought the case for the importance of conserving this artwork was very compelling, and that the team was well qualified and the budget seems very thorough. I thought that the timeline perhaps needed a little more specificity in terms of tasks and times. That was really the only recommendation I had, was for a little more detail there.
I appreciated the future preservation and repurposing onto a new building. I think that's a great way of thinking, forward thinking, and conserving this, especially preserving his legacy.
I think also it's the age of the artwork is also just an interesting factor in here, that it's preserving an artwork for a fairly long time. The longevity of the work as it is should speak to its durability in the future as well, given the like artist material selection and everything else. So.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 95%. Next, please open application ID 2023-24372, submitted by the American Visionary Art Museum. The average initial score is 98%. Lead reader, Sarah Caparaletti, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
So this conservation grant is for 3 sculptures that are on the outdoor plaza of the American Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore. There's 3 different pieces. One is a sculpture of called Cosmic Galaxy Egg. The other is called Phoenix, and the third is Bluebird of Happiness. These are all works that have been on the outdoor plaza of the museum for quite a long time, and so right now they're being prioritized for conservation, just to update the outdoor sculptures because they are always on display. So they receive a lot of foot traffic and are just at risk of wearing down over time. So there are mosaic elements to the egg piece, and so they're just going to be working on fixing that damage. And then there's just an ongoing part of the museum just to maintain the artwork for the preservation of the museum and for Baltimore's cultural scene. So this project is divided into 3 parts, and so the timeline breaks down fixing and repairing parts on each piece. I noted that they talk about how the 3 works are connected and yet separate, and so the timeline I found feasible to for each of the sculptures, and the conservation team is very experienced, so there's confidence that they will carry out the project. And then there's also museum staff available to help, and they've previously worked with conservation work, so they're a good asset to have as well. And I also found the budget outline realistic.
All right, thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
Just to chime in, I completely agree. I think it was an excellent descriptive and simple first line. Again, thank you. The narrative was well articulated and the support was very clear in their descriptions.
I think that there are aspects of the American Visionary Art Museum's overall mission for visionary art that are not outlined in the application, but that it's important that the importance of conserving non-traditional perspectives in art is exceptionally relevant, and that I would recommend that in putting together applications like that, that they should flex a little on that. I also, like, generally in review of the application, it's incredibly complex, and in order to gain a full scope of like the ins and outs of how the mechanics work, it sort of required comparing a lot of documents to one another, looking for missing pieces across different things, which is fine. It's complete and comprehensive. I would say that in their budget that they should feel comfortable pointing out the amount of like internal contribution to the work. On first review, the like some amount that they're asking for seemed lower, but when you factor in the in-kind donation of museum staff, labor, time, materials, and resources they have access to, that gets a lot more realistic, and including that would be definitely helpful in review, including that information.
Panelists, any other questions, thoughts, recommendations? All right, Lisa and Ryan, as the staff discipline experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No additional comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 99%. Next. Please open application ID 2023-24390, submitted by the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Foundation. The average initial score is 91%. Lead reader, Gail, will now introduce the grant in connection to the rubric with 2 minutes beginning now.
The Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Foundation is seeking funding to restore a 9-element botanical sculpture entitled Flora. It's designed and fabricated by Wendy Ross of Ross Studios. It is located in the middle of a fountain at Hopkins Plaza in Baltimore. The applicant gave a strong and detailed description of the artwork needing restoration. Each repair is very clearly defined, explained and paired with fantastic images of the areas needing restoration. Along with thorough, detailed timeline of when this will occur. The application had an overall defined mission and history and the purpose for the restoration and conservation. Strong professionalism and the quality demonstrated a clear ability to successfully complete this project. I have to add, I was pretty fascinated by the research and the condition report. It's breathtaking and dramatic sculpture that it would be nice to see this taking care of the amount of work to see in this public art piece. It's amazing engineering feat. I'm just a painter, so just to look at this was amazing, and the elegance of work. I really didn't have any suggestions of change with this, and I open this to the panel.
Thank you. Panelists, we now have 3 minutes for any additional discussion, starting now.
I also noted that the artwork is very clearly detailed and the restoration that needs to take place is very clearly detailed. I felt like the application could have addressed the cultural or historical relevance of the artwork a little bit more. I understand that it was initially part of a beautification project, but I would appreciate more information about the community relevance for the sculpture today, and also its historic relevance in that site.
I think that's kind of what I was getting at. And of course, all of a sudden, my computer is not letting me see. Okay, it came back to life. That I felt like I wasn't quite sure. Well, it's a very big project, geographically important piece. We understand the visual impact it has in the area. I didn't feel like there was enough context about why it was prioritized for conservation over perhaps other things. And I think that's kind of maybe, dovetails with what you were saying as well. But there's a lot of, it's complicated. There are a lot of vendors involved. There's impact on pedestrians. And I thought that their timeline integrated all those needs very well. And there's thorough analysis of problems and recommendations and treatments, and it's a big one. They need to obtain other funding from other sources as well, and they seem to have a plan. So
I had one more note, which is that I was a little unclear. They talk about deinstalling the work and moving the work, but there's not a lot of detail given on that. So it's not clear to me where the the conservation is taking place. There's in the budget, they have money for the transportation, installation, deinstallation. but it's not clear to me where that all is happening. So a little more detail there would be helpful for understanding that process.
I would also recommend clarification in that the proposal includes painting the artwork, which changes the external aesthetic, picking out colors. So that would modify the, what the work looks like. And additionally, like in my notes, I have the 10 years, they outline clear like structural issues with corrosion in the work, and 10 years is a relatively short lifespan. I would say that in the plan presenting like what the expected durability of implementing this conservation effort is, and how it resolves those issues, so that it's what the expected outcome can be.
Thank you, panelists. Time is up.
All right, thank you. Lisa and Ryan, as the staff experts, do you have any additional information to share?
No further comment.
Thank you. Based on the information gathered from the discussion, please take 1 minute now to edit your final score in Smart Simple with any additional comments if desired, with 1 minute starting now.
Time is up.
And the average final score is 91%. And that concludes our review for today. Thank you, panelists, so much for your time and thoughtfulness today. Your role in this process is critical, and your discussions and feedback are immensely valuable. Thank you also to MSAC Counselor Chris Sloan for joining us to monitor the panel process today. I'm going to turn it over to Liesl for some final thoughts.
Yes, I made an error in the email that I sent to applicants that the meeting was starting at 12:45 p.m. I confused it with our Monday meeting, our Group A. I apologize for that error. This entire meeting has been recorded, and so we're going to put this up on YouTube. And as soon as I have the link, I will email you that link along with the specific time that your grant was discussed, and you'll be able to hear the panel's comments about your grant as well as see your final score. No grant awards are discussed in this meeting. All right, I apologize for that error.
All right, thank you so much. So observers, as Liesl notes, she'll be following up, but please feel free to contact us if there are any other questions. And this concludes the public portion of the meeting, and we can